Well, welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Mondays with Mundy. And that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. You're watching this episode on Monday, October the 11th. And 150 years ago, on what would have been Sunday, yesterday, October the 10th of 1871, was the assassination of Philadelphia's leading Black citizen, soldier, civil rights activist, you name it. And his name was Octavius V. Catto. He was Philadelphia's version of Frederick Douglass in many, many, many ways. And so in honor of that anniversary, if you will, and given the relationship that the Union League had with Catto, I thought we'd talk about Catto today. So let's just do that and let's get started now. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, we go from the beginning. All right, here we go. Got it to work. I'm sure you're as surprised as I am. So, all right. So Philadelphia's Frederick Douglass, Octavius V. Catto, and the Union League. So Catto was born on February the 22nd of 1839 in Charleston, South Carolina, to a mixed family in more than one way. His mother came from an old mixed but free family of African Americans in Charleston. And his father, though, was an enslaved millwright who later purchased his slavery and, interestingly enough, became an ordained Presbyterian minister. And when that happened, he went north with his family, first to Baltimore and then to Philadelphia, which is how Catto got to be here. So Catto was educated in Philadelphia in a number of different schools, but he ended up at a place called the Institute for Colored Youth, which is on Bainbridge Street between 9th and 10th. And that is it. It was founded in 1837 by a group of Quakers whose only goal was to make sure that young Black boys and girls had a good classical education. And that's what they got there, right? The school itself no longer exists as the ICY, as it became known. Instead, in the late 19th century, early 20th, it moved out to Chester County and became known as Cheney University. All right. So Catto was an incredibly bright young man, and after graduating, he did some studying in classical languages, and then he became a teacher at the school in 1859, teaching math and English. And that's where things took off, because of course Catto, by being such a smart guy, he knew what things were like in Philadelphia, and especially the way that the Black community was being treated. And so he became one of its leading proponents for civil rights for Blacks. All right. Civil War comes along in April of 1861. And on December 27th of 1862, the Union League of Philadelphia was organized, and they moved into this building, their first clubhouse, at 1118 Chestnut Street, the old Hartman Coon Mansion. Okay. All right. So 3 months later, on May 22nd of 1863, the War Department in Washington, D.C., which was headed by Edwin McMaster Stanton, the Secretary of War, apparently got the message from civil rights activists like Frederick Douglass and Octavius V. Catto, and they formed something called the Bureau of Colored Troops. So now they're going to recruit Black men to fight in the Union Army, something that both Douglass and Catto had been pushing for since the beginning of the war itself. On June the 8th, at the Union League building on Chestnut Street, there was a meeting of the city's leading Black citizens and League members. And the subject was how to promote the recruitment of Black soldiers for the Civil War. And the result was that a letter was written and then signed by 276 Philadelphians, 75% of whom, 206, were Union League members. And that letter went to Stanton in Washington, D.C. And a very quick reply received on June the 17th, this group of men was given a permission to raise 3 Black regiments. And this group of men would become known as the Supervisory Committee for the Enlistment of Colored Troops. Not all of them were members of it, though, of course, but made up predominantly of Union League members and, of course, with the aid of Octavius V. Catto and the Black citizens of Philadelphia. So, all right. And, of course, you can't raise troops without a place to train them. And so Camp William Penn was created by the Supervisory Committee, and it was located in what is today Cheltenham Township. So just go north of the city. So just go straight up Broad Street, go across Cheltenham Avenue, 3 blocks up on Sycamore, and that was where Camp William Penn was located. Okay, and the site, the space is still there today, and there's a historical marker there as well. So by the end of the war, 11 regiments of black soldiers were raised, recruited, trained, and sent off to war from Camp William Penn. That's 11,000 soldiers, right? A substantial amount of men who fought in the war itself. Now, Catto, shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863, organized a company of black soldiers, that's 100 men, and went out to Harrisburg to volunteer to fight for the Union Army during the Battle of Gettysburg itself. And unfortunately, the commander of the military district, General Darius Couch, would not permit them to do that, even though they had permission from the War Department to do it. Couch just wouldn't let them do it. And so regretfully, they came back to Philadelphia, which is probably a good thing because 3 days after the battle ended, on July the 6th of 1863, there was a mass meeting of Philadelphians held at National Hall, which was on the north side of Market between 12th and 13th. And this was sponsored by the Union League. And the message was, to arms, to arms. That is, black men, pick up your arms and fight for the army. Fight for your dignity, fight for your country, and fight for citizenship as well. Okay. Frederick Douglass was the main speaker on the stage. He was accompanied by William D. Kelly, a founding Union League member, Anna Dickinson, a young Quaker abolitionist. Who else was there? Benjamin Brewster, Union League member, another Union League member who had actually invited Douglass to the event. And of course, Octavius V. Catto was on the stage and gave a speech as well. And as we know, as I just said, it worked very well because eventually 11,000 black soldiers were raised to Camp William Penn to fight during the war itself. So that recruitment drive was incredibly successful, but it also, I think, cemented that relationship between Union League and Catto and Philadelphia's black community during the Civil War itself. So, and by the way, if you haven't been into the Lincoln Memorial Room lately, I would encourage you to do so. And you may remember that when you walked in and looked over the mantle, there was a bronze memorial plaque that listed the 9 white regiments that were raised by the League's military committee. What has since been done is that a new plaque is there, and on it we have added the 11 black regiments. So you have the 9 white and the 11 black regiments on that plaque, and it looks fantastic. So go in the Lincoln Memorial and take a look at it, and you hope you get a chill down your spine because it really it has so much meaning to it. All right. So the Civil War ends in April of 1865, and one of the other big issues in the city at this point in time was the right of blacks to ride streetcars. They were not allowed. They could have. Let me see now. Jump up. There we go. All right, that's what a typical Philadelphia streetcar looked like. They were horse-drawn from the early 1850s until the early 1890s before they became electrified. Blacks were only allowed to stand on the back platform, and this is obviously the front, but you get the idea, right? They were not inside, and it didn't matter what the weather was, what time of the year it was. They were not allowed inside. And Catto had been pushing for this all during the war itself, as had the League. All right, the League was probably one of the leading, how do I put it, white institutions in the city in the 1860s who really took up the cause of civil rights for the city's black citizens, right? Founding League member Morgan McMichael would actually be elected mayor, the first post-Civil War mayor in 1866. And in one of his platforms in his campaign was for the right, that he would support the right of blacks to ride streetcars. But Philadelphia itself was fighting it tooth and nail. This was not, William Penn, City of Brotherly Love. And it would take an act of the Pennsylvania State Legislature in 1867 to force the issue around the entire state itself. But it did eventually happen. So, and Catto was incredibly involved in all of that. And actually, there was a meeting. Actually, what happened in early May of 1865, shortly after the war had ended, 4 black women sat down on a streetcar, and the conductor, as you can imagine, unceremoniously escorted them off. And there was a big backlash in the city's black community. And on May the 18th of 1865, there was a meeting at the League House to discuss how to deal with this whole issue. And Catto, who was there, read a list of 5 resolutions, as you can imagine, eloquently written and equally eloquently spoken. But unfortunately, as we've heard, they didn't have the desired effect until 1867. So, but again, the League, by inviting the black leadership of Philadelphia into the League House, offering its support, is putting itself right in the corner of civil rights at this point in time. All right. So from 1867 to 1869, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution was proposed. right? Here we are. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Funny how voting is still an issue today, isn't it? As it was way back then. So anyway, all right. So this was the third and last of the three Reconstruction amendments. Okay. The Pennsylvania State Legislature approved or ratified the amendment in 1869, and then on March the 30th of 1870, after the appropriate number, the needed number of states had ratified it, it became effective. March 30th of 1870. And to celebrate the occasion, there was a big party in Philadelphia, on a big celebration on April the 26th of 1870 that was held at Horticultural Hall on South Broad Street, just a block or two below the Union League Clubhouse itself. But before the party really began, and there was a procession and a parade on Broad Street and all that kind of stuff, there was a meeting with the city's leading Black leaders, including, headed by actually Octavius V. Catto. And that afternoon, he was presented with an emblematic banner signifying that Blacks have now got the right to vote. Okay. And that was done in the League House. And of course, it's going to be that one. All right. So you can imagine. So walk in the front door sometime and maybe turn to the right where the parlor was back then. And today it's the North Lounge. It's probably where that meeting took place. Maybe the banquet hall on the second floor. Okay. So anyway, so the League is definitely a happy place to be at this point in time. Now, this was a campaign broadside, if you will. You can see the constitutional amendment, and it's all about getting Black suffrage. And if you look on the left-hand side, Geary, Forney, McClure, Cameron were all members of the League, and you can see the League sustains it, the Negro, the equal. On the right-hand side, there's a list of 12 members of Congress from Pennsylvania. 6 of them were Union League members who voted for the 15th Amendment. So you can see how engaged the League really was in the civil rights movement in the 1860s and the 1870s. Right. Okay. Now, back to Catto. All right. There was an election in October of 1871, the first major election in which Blacks could vote in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is still a very unfriendly place towards its Black citizens. And at this point in time, there are an awful lot of famine Irish immigrants. I'm actually a 5th generation of famine Irish, believe it or not. And there's Octavius V. Catto. Catto, on October the 10th, was acting as the proponent of trying to urge his fellow Black citizens to go out and vote. Now, again, he lived at 814 South Street, so that's the neighborhood in which he's encouraging his fellow citizens to go to the different voting places and vote. But obviously, he could tell that it would be a rough day, and he had just purchased a gun for his self-defense, and that's what you see in his right hand. But unfortunately, he was cornered by, and again, this isn't an accurate depiction of exactly what happened, but he was approached by 2 Irish thugs, shall we say, and they shot him stone cold dead, right? And he died within hours at his house on South Street. And that was the end of Octavius V. Catto. All right. And I often wonder about, my Irish family lived in the 800 block of Locust Street, just a few blocks north of there. And I'm all my great-great-grandparents, Mundys. And I'm always wondering what they thought about Blacks and voting at that point in time. I don't know. I know what I hope. Regardless. All right. So Catto's funeral. The arrangements were made by the Union League. Right? There was a committee on arrangements headed by Alexander Colesbury, a League member, and they met the morning of the funeral on October the 16th at the League House. There was also a mass meeting that morning before the actual memorial, if you will, which was at the 1st Regiment Infantry Armory at Broad and Wood Streets, so north of City Hall. Right? That's where Catto's body lay in state. There would be a procession down Broad Street and then out to Lebanon Cemetery in Southwest Philadelphia, where Catto would be interred. And at that mass meeting were many League members. Actually, it was chaired by a founding League member named Henry Charles Carey. And there with Carey were George Boker. I mean, if anybody was the face and heart of the League, it was Boker. William Meredith, its first president. James Clyghorn, its first treasurer. John W. Forney, who had been the secretary of the U.S. Senate. During the war, you had, as I mentioned, William Kelly, Pig Iron Kelly, and Alexander McClure. I mean,
all of the big Union League names were there that day at that ceremony and at that service. So again, it just reaffirms that connection between Philadelphia and the Black community in Philadelphia at that point in time. So now, Catto, as I mentioned, was buried at Mount Lebanon Cemetery, but that cemetery was eventually closed and moved to Delaware County, to what is now called Eden Cemetery in Collingdale. And this is the tombstone on Catto's grave. All right, but it's not the end of the story. The League has one more way to show its involvement with Catto and its appreciation for his place in Philadelphia history. So in 2004, the O.V. Catto Memorial Committee was organized, and it was chaired by two Union League members. And you can see Carol Washington in the center, and then former League President James Straw on the right. And in 2006, the committee announced a capital campaign to raise $1.5 million to erect a sculpture of Octavius V. Catto. And there was no since the Civil War, there had never been a public sculpture of a Black citizen from Philadelphia, but there was going to be now. And this committee commissioned the sculptor Brantley Craig on the left-hand side to do the sculpture. And this is what he did. Magnificent, isn't it? It certainly is very evocative, very spiritual, emotional, but also with a little bit of, determination, all right? So this sculpture, the only one of its kind in Philadelphia, now can be seen on the southwest apron of City Hall, that you see behind it. And this was the dedication ceremony held on September 27th of 2017, all right? As you can imagine, the League was well represented by Jim Straw and Carol Washington, among others, and many League members as well. So that, folks, is the end of our story. I don't know if it's an enjoyable story, but I think it's important for us as League members and employees, such as me, to understand this part of our history and our patrimony, because it's still relevant to this very day, as we've seen in our recent history, both in the city and in the nation as well. So I hope you did enjoy it in some way, if you will. So that's it. So stay tuned, folks. All right. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you again in the next episode. It'll be a video, I believe. Okay, so you won't have to stare at my face on the screen quite like this the next time around. All right. So thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay well, and goodbye.